Herrenmoral and I-Theism. The measure of a man's character is bettered by his morality, lest it was he that fashioned the principles of this moral code, having devised it with the purposes of personal growth and self-aggrandizement. In such a man I deduce this morality of the utmost liberating. There are moralities that strengthen, master moralities, rooted in the self-preservations of the individual, opposed to the collectivist, slavish moralities, whose primary function is self-sacrifice, often in service to some group. The former master morality, or Herrenmoral, opposed to the later slavish morality of sklavenmoral, to use terms coined by Nietzsche. I borrowed to catalogue any number of philosophical ideas pertinent to the self and personal mastery. It is the disposition of the master, king, and or god, opposed to that of his subjects, to which we are concerning ourselves here. A luminous but controversially misunderstood delineation, as is often the case with Nietzsche. For clarification's sake, the mastery spoken of here is strictly that of personal self-mastery, and in no way is meant to apply control over any others. In fact, the only discipline of philosophy I intend to remain clear of here is that of politics, as it is the branch that concerns itself with how we, as the people, should govern ourselves. And to all but the most deaf, I think it should be clear, particularly in light of current events, that the people do not govern themselves. As it pertains to the Western tradition, however, one can see examples of this master perspective in many schools of thought, these naturally often sharing a more secular commonality in their thinking, like the pre-Socratic schools, for example, whose objective lay in the scientific explorations of the knowledge of life itself, opposed to the later, more Platonic influences which served as precursor to prevailing metaphysical concerns. Of course, no greater harm from this transition of thinking toward unthinking, no greater harm to ever plague the Western world was that of this nonsense of the desert god of Abraham and the three death cults of his devotion, three religions that sanctify meekness as a virtue and the will to power as aberrant and sinful. In contrast, the Herrenmoral of the masters holds to that ancient aristocratic disposition of the empowered inner self, by which, under nature's law, is potentially transfigured into true personal divinity, one observed in action and actual attainment, a personal divinity unconcerned with self-sacrifice and promises intangible. To comprehend this ethos is to align oneself with the honest moment from where philosophy first arose, that instant where your curiosity separated you from your experience, so that you could question said experience and every other life, the universe, the moment where you first pondered existence and purpose. It all began with the self, by the self, from the self, for the self. You are situated at the center of your world of experience. You are situated at the center of your world of experience. Eternally perched upon that throne, you are the ruler of your subjective reality. Literally, as every experience, whether manifest or imagined, exists or exists not, in service to you as the experiencer. This statement is voiced not from vanity nor some pretentious eccentricity of solipsism, a veritable sin among the meta tribe, but rather it is proudly exclaimed as not only experiential fact, but as epistemological cornerstone. Every act, every thought, every perception stems from within. Every act, every thought, every perception stems from within this undisruptible vantage point. The consciousness of the individual. Consciousness preceding experience is both mother and father of experience, as well as first experience. It is to know that it was for one's own eye for which the sights were created, for one's own ear for which the arias were composed. To deny this as primary existence is to deny thyself as primary existor. It is to renounce authorship and arbitership of the universe of experience that unfolds in utility before you. God verily exists as a subset of you, as do all gods, and devils too. Defining God not as some invisible sky daddy with a penchant for punishing buggers, but rather the thing and or person, or things that are persons, if polytheistic, for which you accord the most important. That is, defining God as the most important thing in your life. That thing to which you most loyally serve. Mystical superstitions aside, the service you grant your god/gods is a service acted from choice. You choose your own gods. The atheists are those born bold enough to have chosen themselves. To the commoner God-fearers and God-adorers, they accord little attention. I can hear the evangelicals echoing it now, how this is satanic in its nature, as it is that same vanity that caused the fall of the angels. To which I, in response, would thrust my hands in the air in the signs of the horns, not in protestation, but in total agreement, proudly, as this was indeed, at least as per the Judeo-Christian cosmology, noted as the first recorded act of rebellion, the angel Lucifer's repudiation of God's authority to assume for himself the role of ruler within his own separate kingdom. This is golden metaphor for those who need not an external deity for which to prostrate and offer mindless genuflections, but to those proud and strong enough to assume the role as prime arbiter in their own lives, accepting the axiomatic truth of their God-given, read nature-bestowed, sovereignty. This satanic self-assertion of the Miltonian distinction is one of heroism and not of horror, as posited by religionists, who are largely in the business of demonizing, quite literally, their competitors. This literary figure is a champion of individualism, whose narrative is expressed poetically, serving as the archetype for the modern religion of Satanism, for which theism is synonym. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven, serves as the clarion call to this personal uprising, giving voice to the primordial impulse of self-creation, signaling the paradigm shift from servant to ruler, from sklavenmoral to Herrenmoral. In the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche distinguishes between the two sensibilities, those of rulers and those of slaves. The first is manifest from self-affirmation, the other from resentment. Those of the nobler sensibility may often proclaim themselves good. By the nature of their strength and capacity, they will call themselves as they will. But if this goodness is truly marked by resourcefulness and a will to power, then it vindicates itself as such to accord itself as such. The slave, however, unable to match his more fortunate other, inverts the scale of value, proclaiming weakness laudable and power corrupt, self-sacrifice as martyrdom divine, and self-service as evil. Within this inversion of values and subsequent corruption of morals was the structural foundation of Christian dogma laid, the bastard progeny of Judea, sequel to Judaism, which itself was responsible for the monotheistic cancer that would eventually polyp into Christianity and eventually cripple the empire. This sklavenmoral preceding Christianity is no mere religious artifact. It is and remains the great psychological disease of the West, characterized by a slave's approach to living whilst preparing the followers for nothing but death, pattering mindlessly in the meanwhile with an ethos of obedience and submission. Such is the Christian mantra. Such is the Christian mantra, which pauses only to vilify the strong and the proud. The West adopted this position, I assume unbeknownst of its inherent sickness, a disease that would eventually come to devour its culture, rendering its people docile. far removed from the progressive Luciferian flames evidenced by the Greeks and reiterated with the Renaissance, flames of a progress all too soon traded in for the meager comforts of subservience. Egat. By contrast, Herrenmoral, standing as an affirmation of those who share the ethic of one who creates his values rather than one who inherits them, acts not from any obedience/disobedience to authority, but rather responds to the natural laws governing the fidelity of his own nature. This being never an act of rebellion from the Godhead, but the amelioration of the perception of self as God in harmony with nature, bearing itself as God anew. This is not a perversion of the sacred, it is the reclamation of it. So the one true God, the self, that is Itheism. And this has been Herrenmoral, Atheism in Philosophy, with your host, Reverend Count MoriVond. Enjoy your evening.